Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. So yesterday, white supremacists held a White Lives Matter rally. This rally took place in two cities in Tennessee. The first city was Shelbyville. The other one was Murfreesboro. And according to these reports, there were like 100 White Lives Matter protesters. And there were twice as many counter-protesters. And according to some reports, there were up to 4 times as many counter-protesters than actual White Lives Matter protesters. And this protest was against immigration and refugee policies. These people were complaining about white genocide, genocide against the white race and white culture and Southern culture. They were protesting refugee resettlement and immigration to Middle Tennessee. And they were protesting against these refugees from Somalia and Sudan. They claimed that they were marching for white people's rights. Now, fortunately, there were no injuries. There was no damage to property. And that's due in part to the action of the police. But I'll go into that a little bit later. Also, during this demonstration, they were chanting blood and soil, and they said that that basically means our nation is our people. Our skin color is our uniform. That was the slogan or the ideology that these people professed. I will include links to the stories that I relied upon for this video so that you can read them for yourself. And also, it's worth noting that the local Black Lives Matter organization issued their own press release about this rally, indicating that they were not going to participate in counter demonstrations, even though they understand the significance of those counter demonstrations. And they said that they were doing so because they see these types of rallies, these white supremacist rallies, as a distraction away from systemic white supremacy that rallies against Black lives, issues of police brutality and other issues that are manifestations of institutionalized racism. So they did not participate in the counter demonstrations. So I want to take time right now to just share my thoughts about this. First of all, I'm glad that this rally was not a success, that it had small numbers. So that's the first thing that I want to talk about. And the second thing is this. This concept of white lives mattering, this need that these people had for a rally is ridiculous because we live in a predominantly white society where white people, for the most part, control the politics of the society, control the economics of the society, control the criminal justice in the society. They have a consolidation of power. White lives have never they've never been in a position where they don't have value in this society. When we look at policing in this society, we see that there is a premium on white life. We see countless examples of police going out of their way to protect white people, white suspects. But when it comes to Black people, it's shoot first and ask questions later. It's shoot first and then cover up later. It's shoot first and then the officer walks. That's how they deal with Black people. Black lives mean absolutely nothing to these people. Whereas white life is valued, white life is cherished, white life is respected. And another example of this is this whole situation involving the state of emergency around opioid addiction in this country. We see that the president has declared a state of emergency because of the opioid crisis. We see that many legislatures and many people who are lawmakers and politicians are thinking about compassionate ways to deal with that problem now that it is a problem affecting primarily white people. They see this as something that's urgent, that must be taken care of. But when Black people had the problem of crack epidemic in the Black community, when there was heroin problems that still exist in cities like Baltimore, they didn't approach that problem with compassion. Instead, they approached it with a law and order type of posture, with a get tough on crime type of posture, with a merciless posture and position of lock them up and throw away the key. We can see the reality of this. We see the mass incarceration problem in this country. We see the sentencing disparity between crack and powder cocaine. These are manifestations of this society and its disrespect for Black lives and its completely different type of approach to problems that affect Black people as compared to problems that affect white people. So again, we're reminded that white lives matter and Black lives don't when it comes to policing and when it comes to law enforcement and the issue of drug addiction in this country. Another thing that I have to talk about is the importance of these counter demonstrations. That cannot be stressed enough. Like one of the people, one of these counter protesters was asked about the demonstration. And they basically said this. They said, we can't let hate go unchecked in this nation. Again, I'll include links to the story so you can read them for yourself. But I agree with that wholeheartedly. We cannot get to a place where these hate groups feel comfortable protesting. We can't get to a place where it becomes acceptable for people to espouse and support white supremacist ideology. This country had made some kind of progress to some degree where people would avoid being called racist, where people look down upon being affiliated with racism and white supremacy. Even bigots would try to avoid being called racist because there was shame attached to racism. There was shame attached to it. But nowadays, people are getting emboldened because they have this buffoon in the White House who is sympathetic to these white supremacists. They feel like one of their own is in the White House now, so they can come out of the closet. And these people were enraged before when they saw a Black man in the White House, so they couldn't contain themselves anymore. They couldn't hold back anymore. They had to unleash their hatred. Their horns began to sprout out of their heads, and they began to expose themselves for who they are. So we can't get to a place where these people are allowed to just protest and build their movement and build their momentum. We can't do that. We have to be there to counter their efforts, because otherwise we'll look up and we'll see a return to the days when you had thousands upon thousands of KKK members boldly and proudly marching through the nation's capital in massive numbers. We'll go back to those days. That's what will happen. We'll go back to a time when these groups controlled the police, the local police. We'll go back to a time when these groups could commit acts of terrorism if we don't check these people now. If we don't demand of the federal government take this problem seriously. We'll go back to those days where these people had power. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to return to those days. So we have to be there to counter these people. And that's what happened in Tennessee. You had people protesting against these white supremacists. You had the protesters shouting them down. Like as these white supremacists were trying to spread their message, you had the counter protesters playing Bob Marley music loud to disrupt these white supremacists. You had the counter protesters speaking out and, using counter slogans to counter these white supremacists. And that's what needs to happen. These people need to be confronted. You can't talk about fighting white supremacy or, criticize white supremacy if you're not willing to put your body on the front line and fight against these white supremacists. So, that's one thing. And then also, I need to talk about the role of the police. I mean, this situation was under control because the police did what police are supposed to do. They separated the crowds, they set up checkpoints, and they confiscated weapons. We saw the situation in Charlottesville where people were walking around with weapons and shields and guns, where you have one of these people actually fire a gun toward a crowd. So they were allowed to do that kind of stuff in Charlottesville. That's why you had a woman killed in Charlottesville. That's why you had several people injured in Charlottesville, because the police did not do their job. And that's one of the primary things that we need to make sure of. In addition to having these counter demonstrations, we need to hold our officials accountable to make sure that they ensure that everyone that participates in these demonstrations is safe, that they ensure that the public is safe from these hate mongers. So those are my thoughts about this, man. It's just something else that we're reaching a time and age where you're having back-to-back white supremacist demonstrations. This is a bad sign for the direction of this country. And it's up to us to stand up against these hate mongers. And before I close out, I just have to make this one last point, and that's this. These white supremacists, these racists, these hate mongers, they are looking for scapegoats to blame for their problems in life. So they look at the immigrant. They blame the immigrant for their problems. They blame Latinos for their problems. They blame African Americans for their problems. They blame Jews for their problems. They blame the Muslims for their problems. They blame everyone except for themselves. They blame everyone except for the power elite that actually runs this country. These people, you would think that they would have some kind of class consciousness, because many of these people are working people, many of these people are poor people. But instead of having class consciousness, these people have been seduced by racism and white supremacy, and they have allowed themselves to become the pawns of the system. They have allowed themselves to become the foot soldiers of white supremacy. Instead of gaining consciousness, instead of gaining political awareness about the system that holds working people and poor people back, instead of challenging those who rule this country, these people act as the foot soldiers and the footstools for the ruling elite in this country. They are Donald Trump's little pawns, Donald Trump's little puppets. These people support Donald Trump as if he is of the same class that they are in. When Donald Trump is a millionaire, billionaire, he wouldn't associate with these people in public if he wasn't running for office. These people don't have anything in common with Donald Trump other than his skin color and his bigotry. And these people don't realize that they are working against their own self-interest by supporting an oligarch like Donald Trump. They don't realize that they are working against their own self-interest by supporting a party that is putting forth a budget that will hurt poor and working people regardless of their race. These people are blind, deaf, and dumb, and they're lashing out at people that they should be uniting with, but they are too ignorant, too stupid to realize it.